Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. You know those photos you see online where people will post something that they're claiming to be Sasquatch, and when you look at it yourself, it ends up being a tree stump? You know, you see those a lot, especially on Facebook. People will post pictures claiming that they're Bigfoot, and it'll just be a tree stump that kind of has the shape of a Bigfoot creature. And it's usually from far away, so it's kind of hard to tell or make out any details. In the story I want to talk about today, this report that I found online, this encounter describes something where the witnesses initially think they're looking at a tree stump because it's not moving. It's something that kind of has the shape of a being, a Bigfoot creature, or something standing upright. But then it moves and they're like, oh my god, it's not a tree stump, it's a Sasquatch, and it can't be anything else. That's what occurs in the encounter I'm going to read you today. This happened back in 1983, the month of September in Washington. There's a group of 4 kids playing outside, and one of them sees something that they think is a tree stump at first, and it turns out to be something totally different, something mind-blowing, something mysterious, something unexplained. Let's get into it here. My 4 friends and I were playing Chinese jump rope in their yard late one afternoon, just before evening. My neighbor owned somewhere around 100 acres across the street and the 5-acre parcel we were playing on. He owned a herd of buffalo, and for some reason he had one young buffalo alone on this parcel. As my friends and I were playing, the buffalo caught our attention as it came running across the property. I remember we all looked up at it and wondered why it would have acted so spooked. We went back to playing, and a bit later one of my friends, the only boy, exclaimed, "Did you guys see that? There was a tall black thing on 2 legs that just jumped across the creek." We all looked out into the field but didn't see anything. The rest of us told him to quit messing around, but he insisted he was serious. We dismissed his claims and continued our game. Since it wasn't my turn, I kept scanning the field, wondering what the boy may have seen. I noticed a black stump under a tree, which I couldn't recall being there before. I kept looking at it, thinking, is that a stump or something else? The shape looked like a tall black figure standing upright, leaning forward with very long arms down to its knees. The head was turned, looking directly at us. However, it was so still I thought it had to be a burnt stump. I felt it was looking directly at me, but it didn't move at all. I kept my eyes fixed on it, but turned my head to make it look like I wasn't watching it. Immediately it began to run across the field. It ran on 2 legs. It had very long swinging arms and a flat face. It was very tall and covered in black hair. I yelled and everyone turned and started screaming. Upon hearing our screams, it turned to look at us and immediately turned its direction and ran back up into the woods. We were all very scared and ran into the house. My friend's dad believed us, as he said he had seen a Bigfoot when they had lived in Moses Lake, Washington. I was so scared I called my parents next door and wanted them to come pick me up in their car. My family dismissed our claims, but I know there's no way it was anything else but a Bigfoot. The next day we went out into the field. We couldn't find any footprints, but could see where something large ran through in the tall grass. Looking under the tree where I originally saw the stump, I estimated it was about 7 feet tall. Based on a tree limb, it was just beneath. There was a deer path where we saw it enter the woods. When we approached the path, my friend's dog started growling, so we took off. The next school day, we were riding the bus home. I was excited to tell the other kids what we had witnessed. Of course, they all started to tease us, and the other kids, which had witnessed the encounter, quickly backed off of our story and would never speak of it again. I'm 100% positive we saw a Bigfoot that day. No other animal could run on 2 legs with arms swinging the way this did. Its face was flat, so in no way could it have been a bear. It was too big and it moved differently than a human. Based on the way it watched us and waited until it thought we were not looking at it, I believe it's an intelligent creature. I think we have them around us a lot more than we will ever know. I've had other experiences where I may have heard vocalizations, wood knocking, and possibly may have smelt it, but I don't know for sure. I also know there are a lot more people who have witnessed similar events but never report it. I laugh at the naive who don't believe, because I know the truth. I wonder how often this happens, where you think there's nothing around. You're in the woods, you're hiking around, and obviously there's trees everywhere. There's fallen trees all over the place. Tree stumps everywhere. How often are you walking around and one of these things that you just brush off to be a tree stump is actually a Bigfoot? I've heard other stories like this where hunters will be out in the woods, they'll be walking through like a clear cut or something, and there's tree stumps everywhere. But then one of them that's kind of peculiar, or one of them that stands out, all of a sudden stands up, and takes off running or walking, and is actually a Sasquatch. There's a lot of stories like that. Usually, you get pictures online of people claiming something to be Bigfoot, and it ends up being a tree stump. But like the opposite seems to happen quite often as well. This encounter is pretty creepy because this Sasquatch creature was just, imitating a tree stump, standing perfectly still and just observing these kids playing, which, when I think about that, I think of, what is this thing thinking while it's observing? Is it just being curious, or does it have other motives? You could get into the whole missing 411 thing and the missing persons cases and, the national forests across America and in the parks here in Canada. Was this thing planning to maybe snatch one of these kids and run off? But the way this creature is described in the report, not in the actual story part that I read to you guys, but in the rest of the report, it's described as being kind of skinny, about 7 feet tall, and not really bulky or big as you would expect maybe like a fully grown male Sasquatch to be, even a female Sasquatch. When you look at Patty, she was about 7 feet tall, but she wasn't very thin. When I hear this description in this story, like a really thin, kind of more lanky 7 foot tall Sasquatch, I imagine it being probably a young male Sasquatch, like a juvenile male. Maybe it was just curious, maybe it was planning to take one of these kids when the opportunity came. And it's interesting because this thing jumped a creek. Usually where there's creeks, there's softer ground, there's mud a lot of the times. Yet they couldn't find any tracks, which I think is very interesting. What does that mean? This happens so often. Sasquatch is seen, it's witnessed, it's heard, it's smelt, but there's no tracks. Who knows what's going on there? There's so many theories, and, I don't know if we'll ever find out. Either you'll see tracks, you'll find tracks, and you won't see the creature, or you'll see the creature, and you won't find tracks. Unless it's the Patterson footage, then you get both. But that seems to be very rare. Also, something that's not in the actual telling of this encounter is that one of the friends, when they got back to the house, looked back at the creature as it was running across the field. And I guess the people who lived there, their dog ran after this thing and was barking at it, and this creature actually swatted at it. And the dog ran towards the house. It was just a little dog, I think it was a spaniel. And that's very crazy because usually animals avoid these things. It's stated in this report that the dog probably was trying to protect the kids, and that's why it went after it. But also in the story it says, the day after they went to that spot to see if they could find anything, and the dog was pretty freaked out when they were checking out the deer trail. It makes you wonder, was that thing still around? Could the dog sense it? Did it actually leave, or was it still somewhere nearby? Who knows? Who knows? But this encounter could have turned really bad. One of those kids could have gotten taken. That's always a possibility. We don't know for sure what causes these missing 411 cases where people just disappear under mysterious circumstances. But we all have heard the Dennis Martin story from back in the 60s where, young Dennis Martin was just taken. I think he was by a river or something, and he was just taken, out of nowhere. And nobody knows what happened to him. He was never found. I don't know if this was a juvenile Sasquatch. It could have just been a curious one that was observing these kids playing. There was a report here in Alberta from back in the day. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but it was out near Nordegg. There was a summer camp, and the kids were playing some sort of game, and one of the kids walked off into the woods by themselves, and they tripped, and when they went to stand up, they saw that they were pretty much face to face with a Sasquatch creature. So it seems to be something they do, is just watch kids and like observe them playing, which is, to me, is very creepy and unsettling. But it makes you wonder, like, you know paranormal cases where kids, like young kids, they'll tend to see things more often than adults do. You know, they're just more open to the possibilities, I guess, and paranormal phenomena exposes itself to children more often than it does adults. It seems to be the case sometimes with these Bigfoot reports. A lot of times they'll reveal themselves to kids, maybe because they're not as threatening and they're more innocent, less dangerous, I don't know. But it must have been quite a shocking encounter, seeing as how the person who sent in this report to the BFRO wanted to be, picked up by their parents, who were like, they lived right there. They were their neighbors. They wanted to be picked up in the car. They didn't want to walk home. And to be fair, if I was, that age, 9 years old, and I saw this thing, I'd probably feel the same way. But it's just another one of those creepy, weird encounters where it just watches you, and you think it's one thing at first, so you just kind of brush it off. It just looks like a tree stump, but it turns out to be a lot more than that. It makes you wonder, when you're out in the wilderness, even though, yes, there's tree stumps everywhere, maybe you should, pay close attention to them sometimes. I don't know. On the opposite end of that, don't take pictures of every tree stump and post them online saying that they're Bigfoot unless you actually see the tree stump stand up and walk away. Anyways, I just wanted to share this report with you guys. I thought it was pretty interesting. Another one that could have turned out poorly, but thank goodness it didn't. That's all today. We'll see you next time on Mountain Beast Mysteries.